I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel a sort of
innocence about her. You just thought, wow, this girl is...
Few events in public life have the power to alter an entire narrative with a single decision. Sometimes it does not happen through a dramatic speech or a public confrontation. Sometimes it happens when a private figure decides he has finally seen enough and refuses to participate. In that moment, the direction of a story can change forever. That is exactly why so many people are focused on what has reportedly unfolded around Charles Spencer, the 9th Earl Spencer, and the continuing debate surrounding the legacy of Princess Diana. Charles Spencer, brother of Diana and guardian of one of the most important family legacies in modern Britain, has found himself at the centre of a controversy that is sending shockwaves through royal circles, media companies, and celebrity observers alike. Reports suggest that his reaction to a proposed project connected to Diana's memory was blunt, direct, and impossible to ignore. According to accounts circulating among royal commentators, a few simple words may have carried more weight than months of public relations campaigns ever could. What makes the situation so significant is not merely the criticism itself. Public figures receive criticism every day. The difference here is the source. This is not coming from a longtime opponent, a tabloid columnist, or a palace insider. It is coming from the man who knew Diana as a sister long before the world knew her as a princess. That reality has added a level of gravity that many observers believe cannot easily be dismissed. The question now being discussed across media outlets is straightforward but difficult. If someone with such a close personal connection to Diana raises concerns about how her story is being presented, what impact does that have on the wider public conversation? It is a question that continues to spark intense debate among royal followers, industry executives, and supporters on all sides of the discussion. To understand why this development carries so much weight, it is necessary to understand Charles Spencer himself. Publicly, he is often seen as a historian, author, and custodian of a famous family estate. Yet behind those titles is a man who has spent decades carrying the responsibility of protecting his sister's memory and preserving her place in history. Many people still remember September 1997, when the world gathered to mourn Princess Diana following her tragic death. Inside Westminster Abbey, Charles Spencer delivered a eulogy that immediately became one of the most discussed speeches of the modern era. Rather than simply offering comfort, he challenged assumptions, defended his sister's character, and promised that her family would continue to protect the values she held dear. It was a moment that resonated around the globe and remains a defining chapter in his public life. For Spencer, those words were not merely ceremonial. Observers have long argued that they reflected a commitment he has continued to honor ever since. While public attention moved from one royal headline to another, he largely remained focused on preserving Diana's legacy, away from the noise and spectacle that so often surrounded her life. That commitment is closely tied to Althorp House, the Spencer family estate in Northamptonshire. The property is more than a historic residence. It is the place where Diana spent much of her youth and where many of her earliest memories were formed. Today, it remains one of the locations most strongly associated with her personal story and enduring legacy. At Althorp, Diana's resting place sits on a private island, surrounded by nature and protected from the constant attention that defined so much of her life. Because of that, Charles Spencer occupies a unique position. He is not simply a relative safeguarding family history. He is one of the principal custodians of how Diana's memory is preserved and presented to future generations. For years, he rarely engaged in public disputes regarding that legacy. He generally avoided becoming involved in every controversy, choosing instead to remain measured and reserved. Yet many commentators believe recent years have brought growing tensions surrounding the way Diana's story has been referenced in public discussions, documentaries, interviews, and media projects. Those conversations often point to a series of public comparisons between Diana's experiences and those of Meghan Markle. Some supporters view such comparisons as natural and understandable. Critics, however, argue that they have become increasingly central to the public narrative surrounding Harry and Meghan's post-royal media ventures. Observers frequently note moments that drew public attention because they appeared connected to Diana's image or memory. Early examples were often viewed warmly. Jewelry associated with Diana, including well-known pieces from her collection, generated positive reactions and were widely interpreted as heartfelt tributes. At the time, many people saw those choices as meaningful acknowledgements of Harry's late mother and the important role she played in his life. As the years passed, however, some commentators argued that the comparisons expanded beyond symbolic gestures. They pointed to interviews, documentaries, and public discussions that highlighted themes many people associated with Diana's own struggles during her years inside the royal system. One of the most frequently discussed examples remains the 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey. Regardless of where people stood on the claims made during that conversation, commentators immediately noted parallels between the broader themes of institutional conflict, public pressure, emotional hardship, and direct communication with audiences outside traditional royal channels. Those similarities became a major talking point throughout the media landscape. The debate only intensified as additional projects followed. Documentary series, streaming productions, interviews, and public appearances continued to explore themes that many observers connected with Diana's experiences. Supporters viewed those parallels as valid reflections of modern challenges. Critics saw them as an effort to position Meghan within an established historical narrative that already held immense emotional power. For someone like Charles Spencer, whose life has been deeply shaped by the consequences of Diana's public treatment, those developments inevitably carried special significance. Whether he agreed or disagreed with specific portrayals, he occupied a unique position that few others could claim. He witnessed many of the original events firsthand and understood the personal realities behind the public mythology. By the beginning of 2026, the media environment surrounding Harry and Meghan appeared increasingly challenging. Several business ventures faced heightened scrutiny from commentators and entertainment analysts. Industry discussions often centered on whether major partnerships had achieved the cultural impact originally anticipated when they were announced with enormous fanfare. Against that backdrop, attention reportedly shifted towards a project that seemed capable of generating global interest almost immediately. The year 2027 marks 3 decades since Diana's death, a milestone likely to inspire documentaries, retrospectives, books, and major television specials across multiple countries. From a media perspective, the appeal is obvious. Diana remains one of the most recognizable and influential figures of the modern era. Interest in her life continues across generations, and any major anniversary project would almost certainly attract substantial public attention. For streaming platforms competing for viewers, such a project could represent a major cultural event, rather than simply another documentary release. Reports from royal commentators suggested that discussions emerged around creating a large-scale production focused on Diana's life, legacy, and lasting impact. The concept reportedly involved examining her struggles, her influence, and the ways her story continues to shape conversations decades later. According to those reports, one proposed angle involved drawing strong connections between Diana's experiences and more recent royal controversies. Supporters believed this approach would help modern audiences understand why her story still resonates. Critics argued that such comparisons risked oversimplifying complex historical events and placing different experiences into a single narrative framework. Whatever the merits of those competing viewpoints, one practical reality quickly became clear. Any ambitious project centered on Diana's legacy would carry far greater credibility if it had some level of cooperation from the Spencer family. Access, historical context, family perspectives, and symbolic endorsement would all add tremendous value. That is why reported outreach to Charles Spencer attracted so much attention. From the perspective of producers, they were not merely seeking another interview subject. They were approaching one of the most important figures connected to Diana's memory. His participation could elevate a project instantly. His refusal could create an entirely different conversation. And that is where the situation reportedly reached its most dramatic turning point. When discussions allegedly moved towards securing support for the anniversary project, the response that followed became the center of intense speculation. For many observers, the issue was no longer simply about a documentary, a streaming deal, or a media strategy. It had become a broader debate about legacy, ownership, memory, and who ultimately has the authority to define the story of Princess Diana for future generations. For the people involved, the stakes could hardly be higher, because when a project seeks to tell the story of one of the most influential women of the last century gaining the support of the family member who has spent decades protecting that legacy is not a small detail. It is everything. What reportedly sat at the center of the proposal was not merely a documentary project. It was access. Access to places, records, memories, and family history that cannot be recreated with a production budget, no matter how large that budget might be. According to royal commentators and media reports, those behind the project hoped to secure cooperation from Althorp House itself, the Spencer family estate that has stood for centuries and remains deeply connected to Princess Diana's life and legacy. The appeal of such access is obvious. Historic buildings can be filmed anywhere, archives can sometimes be sourced from collectors, and experts can always be interviewed. But Althorp is different. It is not simply a backdrop, it is one of the locations most closely associated with Diana's personal story. Any major production connected to her life would gain an enormous level of credibility if it were able to include the estate and the family's participation. Reports suggested that discussions also involved the possibility of access to family materials, private records, and historical documents that could help tell a more intimate version of Diana's story. For filmmakers, that kind of material represents the difference between a standard retrospective and something far more compelling. Personal notes, unseen photographs, family memories, and private perspectives can transform a familiar story into one that feels new and emotionally powerful. Perhaps most important of all was the reported desire for Charles Spencer's involvement. His participation would not merely provide information, it would provide legitimacy. A project endorsed by Diana's brother would instantly carry a level of authority that few other productions could hope to match. That is why so much attention has been focused on what happened next. According to accounts circulating among royal observers, Spencer carefully reviewed the concept and considered the broader message being presented. The issue, according to those reports, was not simply the historical content. It was the overall framing and the narrative connections being drawn between past and present events. Commentators claim that when Spencer examined the proposal, he viewed it through the lens of someone who has spent nearly 3 decades protecting his sister's legacy. Whether those reports fully capture his private thinking or not, they have fueled widespread discussion about where the line exists between honouring history and reshaping it for modern audiences. The response that allegedly followed has now become part of royal media folklore. Reports suggest that Spencer's reaction was direct, brief, and unmistakably negative. Whether repeated exactly as originally spoken or not, the message was interpreted as a decisive rejection. Any possibility of cooperation reportedly came to an abrupt halt, and the prospect of gaining access to Althorp and official family support quickly faded from view. For many observers, that moment carried enormous significance. This was not the opinion of a distant commentator or an outside critic. It was the reported judgment of someone uniquely positioned to influence how Diana's story is preserved. Because of that, the rejection immediately became larger than the documentary proposal itself. What happened afterward sparked another layer of discussion that few people initially expected. Attention began shifting toward the evolving relationship between Charles Spencer and Prince William. For years, public focus had largely centered on the tensions between William and Harry. Yet some royal analysts increasingly suggested that another important alliance had been quietly developing in the background. The connection between William and Spencer is rooted in something deeper than public appearances or institutional responsibilities. Both men experienced the same devastating loss. Both have spent decades living with the consequences of Diana's death, and both have been repeatedly confronted with public debates over how her legacy should be remembered and represented. Many commentators believe William has long been protective of his mother's memory. However, as heir to the throne and future king, his position is inherently complicated. Every public statement carries constitutional and political implications. Every intervention risks creating headlines that can quickly spiral into accusations of palace interference, family conflict, or institutional control. Because of those realities, William's ability to engage publicly in certain debates is often limited. Charles Spencer, on the other hand, operates under very different constraints. He is not speaking on behalf of the monarchy. He is speaking as Diana's brother. That distinction dramatically changes how the public interprets his actions and motives. This is one reason why Spencer's reported rejection attracted so much attention. If palace officials oppose a project, critics may argue that the institution is protecting itself. If Diana's own brother raises concerns, the discussion immediately shifts. The debate becomes less about power and more about family stewardship, personal responsibility, and the preservation of memory. That difference matters enormously in the court of public opinion. A dispute framed as institutional control invites one set of reactions. A dispute framed as a family member defending a loved one's legacy invites another. The optics are entirely different, and many media observers recognized that almost immediately. The result, according to several commentators, is that Harry finds himself in an extraordinarily difficult position. Any response risks creating new complications. Criticizing Spencer could be interpreted as challenging a close member of Diana's family. Remaining silent allows speculation to continue. Attempting to defend the project could reignite old arguments that many members of the public have grown tired of revisiting. Whether one agrees with that assessment or not, there is little doubt that the situation creates a delicate balancing act. Family loyalty, public perception, personal conviction, and commercial interests all intersect in ways that make simple solutions almost impossible. At the center of the entire debate is a broader question that extends far beyond royal families or streaming platforms. Where exactly is the line between tribute and commercialization? When does preserving someone's memory become intertwined with business interests? And who gets to decide when that line has been crossed? Those questions are difficult precisely because they rarely have clear answers. It is entirely possible for someone to genuinely love and admire a person while also participating in projects that generate revenue connected to that person's legacy. Human motivations are rarely simple, and public discussions often struggle to account for that complexity. Few people dispute that Harry's love for his mother was real. His grief has been discussed openly for years and has shaped many of the decisions that defined his adult life. From interviews to memoirs to public appearances, Diana's influence on his worldview has remained unmistakable. Yet critics argue that sincerity alone does not automatically settle the debate. They contend that a legacy can be both deeply meaningful and commercially valuable at the same time. Supporters counter that telling personal stories does not necessarily constitute exploitation. The disagreement remains one of the most emotionally charged aspects of the entire conversation. For those who believe Spencer's reported position reflects concern rather than hostility, The issue is not whether Harry cared about Diana. The issue is how Diana's story is being presented, who benefits from that presentation, and whether certain narratives are being shaped in ways that would have concerned her closest relatives. Beyond the emotional and historical questions lies another issue that industry observers continue to analyze: the financial implications. If reports are accurate that a major Diana-focused production was expected to play a central role in future media plans, losing family cooperation could significantly alter those calculations. Entertainment companies invest heavily in projects because they believe audiences will respond. They examine viewing data, subscriber trends, cultural relevance, and long-term value. A project built around one of the most famous figures of the modern era naturally carries enormous commercial potential, but that potential can change if a key source of legitimacy disappears. Industry analysts frequently point out that streaming services are ultimately driven by results. Public sympathy and compelling narratives may attract headlines, but business decisions are usually guided by performance metrics and audience engagement. When expectations shift, corporate strategies often shift as well. This reality extends beyond any single documentary. Brand partnerships, media opportunities, production deals, and public perception all operate within the same ecosystem. Success in that environment depends heavily on credibility, authenticity, and trust. Once questions emerge about any of those elements, they can affect conversations far beyond the original controversy. That is why many entertainment observers view the Spencer situation as more than a dispute over one proposed production. In their view, it touches on larger questions surrounding image management, public trust, and long-term brand identity. Hollywood, perhaps more than any other industry, runs on perception. Relationships matter. Reputation matters, access matters. The ability to convince audiences that a story is authentic often determines whether a project succeeds or struggles. For years, Meghan occupied a distinctive position within that landscape. She was frequently viewed as someone who could bridge two worlds: modern celebrity culture and one of the world's most famous royal institutions. That combination created opportunities few public figures could match. The challenge arises when questions begin to surface regarding who controls the narrative and who possesses the strongest claim to authenticity. If influential voices connected directly to the history being discussed appear reluctant to support a project, industry decision-makers inevitably take notice. This does not automatically determine the future of any individual venture. Brands recover, strategies evolve, and public opinion can change rapidly. However, perception remains powerful. Once doubts begin circulating among executives, investors, producers, and audiences, those doubts can become part of the story itself. Observers have already pointed to various signs that expectations surrounding several projects have evolved over time. On their own, those developments may not be decisive. Yet when viewed collectively, they contribute to a growing discussion about momentum, direction, and long-term sustainability. And that is why so many analysts continue to focus on Spencer's reported refusal. In their eyes, it was not merely the rejection of a proposal. It was a symbolic moment that intensified existing questions about credibility, access, and public trust. Whether those questions ultimately reshape the future of the Sussex brand remains to be seen, but many believe this episode could accelerate concerns that were already beginning to emerge beneath the surface. Behind all the headlines, media deals, and public debate lies a much more personal story. For many royal watchers, Charles Spencer's reported stance is not really about streaming platforms or business strategy at all. It is about Princess Diana and the responsibility he has felt toward her memory for nearly 3 decades. Much of that responsibility is tied to the controversy surrounding Diana's 1995 Panorama interview. Years later, investigations raised serious concerns about the methods used to obtain that interview, leading to widespread criticism and renewed debate about how Diana was treated during some of the most difficult periods of her life. For many observers, those events had a lasting impact on Charles Spencer. They reinforced his determination to protect his sister's legacy and to ensure that her story would not be shaped by people he believed had interests beyond simply preserving the historical record. That background helps explain why reports of his rejection of a major Diana-related media project have attracted so much attention. Supporters argue that he sees such proposals through the lens of someone who witnessed firsthand how public narratives can take on a life of their own. To them, this is not a business dispute. It is a question of stewardship and family responsibility. The situation also places Prince Harry in a difficult position. Throughout his life, the Spencer family has represented an important connection to his mother's side of the family and the world she came from. Following Diana's death, those relationships remained a meaningful part of his personal history. Because of that, commentators have suggested that any disagreement involving Charles Spencer carries significance beyond a typical family dispute. It touches on issues of memory, loyalty, and differing views about how Diana's legacy should be presented to the public. Another major factor in this story involves the archives at Althorp. For years, reports have suggested that the estate contains private materials connected to Diana that have never been released publicly. Those materials have long been viewed as potentially valuable to historians, filmmakers, and anyone interested in understanding more about Diana's life. For producers, access to such material could have transformed a documentary project. Audiences already know the public story. They have seen the famous photographs, interviews, and major public moments countless times. What remains largely unseen is the private side of Diana's life. That is why the archives reportedly became such an important issue. Exclusive material often provides the emotional and historical depth that separates an ordinary documentary from a landmark production. However, private archives also raise difficult questions. Families must often decide whether personal records should remain private or become part of the public record. In this case, Charles Spencer's reported decision suggests he believes some boundaries should remain in place. Supporters of that position argue that preserving privacy protects parts of Diana's life from becoming another product for public consumption. They believe certain memories belong with the family rather than the entertainment industry. As a result, the archives remain protected, and some of the most personal aspects of Diana's life remain unseen by the wider world. The debate also highlights broader questions about Harry and Meghan's public identity. Much of the attention surrounding the couple over the years has been connected to their relationship with the royal family and the history that comes with it. Industry observers often note that maintaining long-term public interest is challenging. Recognition alone is rarely enough. Successful media brands must continue creating stories and projects that connect with audiences in meaningful ways. Several projects associated with Harry and Meghan have attracted attention, but reactions have been mixed. Some audiences have responded positively, while others have questioned whether the projects achieved the level of impact many expected. This has led to an ongoing discussion about what comes next. Critics argue that royal history, and particularly Diana's legacy, remains one of the strongest emotional connections between the Sussexes and their audience. Supporters believe they can continue building their brand around entirely new ventures and ideas. Whatever side people take, the reported Althorp decision has intensified that conversation. What was once a debate about a documentary has become a broader discussion about identity, legacy, and the future direction of the Sussex brand. Many observers see the moment as symbolic. In their view, Charles Spencer is making a statement about who has the authority to protect and interpret Diana's legacy. Whether people agree with him or not, his position carries weight because of his unique relationship to the story itself. For Harry, the situation may be especially complicated. Family history, public expectations, and personal emotions all intersect in ways that outsiders can only partially understand. Any disagreement involving Diana's memory is likely to have consequences that reach far beyond business concerns. For Meghan, the debate is equally significant. Public comparisons between her experiences and Diana's have been discussed for years. Some people embrace those comparisons, while others reject them. Spencer's reported response has only added fuel to that ongoing debate. Ultimately, the biggest question remains unresolved. Can the Sussex brand continue evolving if Diana's legacy becomes less central to its public narrative? That question sits at the heart of much of the current discussion. The island at Althorp remains quiet, the archives remain private, the personal records remain under family control, and the debate over Diana's legacy continues. What Charles Spencer has reportedly done is more than reject participation in a project. He has reinforced the idea that some parts of Diana's story remain protected by those closest to her. Whether that decision is viewed as preservation, caution, or something else entirely, it has become a defining part of this controversy. As the conversation continues, opinions remain divided and the final outcome remains uncertain. What is clear is that Diana's legacy continues to carry enormous emotional power decades after her death, and discussions about how that legacy should be handled are unlikely to disappear anytime soon. What do you think? Has Charles Spencer taken the right approach in protecting Diana's memory, or should more of that history eventually become public? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future updates. We'll continue following the latest developments and bringing you more coverage as this story unfolds. The final chapter may not be written yet, but the conversation is far from over.